So I've set up a sample palette here. This is what I'm going to be using today. And these are all colors I recommended that you pick up when purchasing your oil paints. If you have these colors, they work together very nicely to mix up to whatever you might need. I'm going to take a look at some of these brushes. Now, every single artist will collect a selection of brushes throughout their career that they realize works for them. And in this class, I've asked you to get a few different types of brushes so that you can narrow in on which brush works for you. And also because brushes, they work better for certain situations. So actually, I'll show you guys these. These are two rounds, a round brush, meaning it's kind of that rounded, pointed end, as you can see. I got these when I was in undergrad, and that would have been back in, I started painting in undergrad in 2011. So these have lasted almost 10 years. They're still in good shape, and they're actually my favorite brushes. At this point, paint has kind of worked into them, so they have a nice stiffness, but they're still soft enough that they're very workable. If you take care of your brushes, you too will keep them for 10 years. And they're not fancy brushes either. This one is the Princeton brand. I believe, not Princeton, it's the, see, it's so worn off you can't even read it. It's just a cheap brand that I got at Blick at Blick. So, all right, those are the rounds. You want to have some rounds. I also recommend having some flats. So here is an example of a flat. You see that there? It's basically got a flat end, right? It's kind of a rectangular brush. And the most useful for a lot of people ends up being the filbert. So this is a filbert brush. And then, I have more filberts here. Technically, this is also a filbert brush. So filberts are very similar to the flats, but the filberts are more rounded at the end. So that's a very good example of a filbert right there. So I recommend you get a selection, just some flats, some filberts, some rounds. So I'm going to do a demo painting for you guys. I'll try and make it pretty quick. This is going to be a simple Alla Prima painting today. What I'm looking at here, and I'll put a photo on the screen, is an apple sitting on an overturned bowl. Something very simple with some simple colors that we can easily observe and interpret. So this canvas is already dry. I think I said sit for 20 minutes, but you really don't need to. This was honestly dry to the touch within like 5 minutes. It's the nice thing about Gamsol is that it is a very quick drying solvent. So that is a benefit to it. All right, so first things first, I think that we should do a simple line drawing. So for line drawings, I like to use a lot of medium because it makes it smoother, it makes it feel more like an actual drawing, and also it makes it dry faster, which I really like because it's kind of a pain when you make a drawing and then you have to wait like days and days and days for it to dry. All right, so I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this in white. I really like making white line drawings because they tend to disappear really well. Some people like working with a darker burnt sienna, and that's a good idea too. It's really what works best for you. Okay, so let's see. And don't worry too much about your sketch. This is all changeable. Alla Prima, it's so easy to work into it that I wouldn't think of this as like this is not a permanent part of your image. Okay. See, like, I'm working on this and I actually feel like it would be better if I placed things higher. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take the rag and just wipe it out. You see how easy that is? It did make it lighter in that area, but again, we're going to cover this space, so it's not really a big deal. All right, so I think that I need to be better about observing where the apple and the bowl need to start and end. So let's see, I want the apple to go up here. I want the bowl to go down here. That's gonna be better for me in terms of establishing the size, shape, proportions of everything. Yeah, that's already so much better. I hope that you guys can see this. It is a very subtle contour line drawing with the white on that light canvas, but you know, personally, I like having a very light drawing because then you don't want to see a ton of line work when you're done, right? Okay, so I feel better about that. I'm not too specific right now because, again, things will certainly change. All right, so let's see. A lot of artists like to start with their darks. So I think that's where we'll start. All right, that is the divot of the apple where the stem's going to go. I'll lightly mark out the stem now, but it really doesn't matter because I think I'll have to paint over that area anyway. Okay, there is a dark sliver down here. Near the lower edge of the apple. And you know, the bowl is white, so it reflects quite a bit of green, actually. So one of the reasons you want to establish your darks first. Not everyone does this, but it is kind of common practice. And the reason for that is because it's so much easier to make the paint you've put down lighter than it is to make it darker. So like if you start very light, and then you say, okay, I put all of this light green in here for the apple, and now I need to get a darker area, you're going to really need to load up your paint with a brush and make heavy marks on top, because if it mixes in at all, it's gonna end up being very grayed out. So we are trying to avoid that. Round that out a little bit. Remember the perspective that you guys learned in drawing 1. Think about how to make these ellipses make sense. I'm looking at this bowl downward, so it's kind of slightly turned, right? All right. And at this stage, you don't need to worry too much about your brush strokes. I mean, you should always be thinking about brush strokes. Think about intentionality behind the marks that you make. I think that a lot of you learned about mark making in 2D design. But a lot of this stuff is going to get kind of covered up at a certain stage. So, you know, don't spend too much time on perfection early on. Right now it's all about establishing what colors go where. Don't use too much medium while you paint either. It can be really tempting to load your brush up with lots and lots of liquid, but at a certain point your paint's gonna get kind of goopy and hard to work with, and you know, no one wants that. If that happens, you kind of have to just wait for things to dry, or you can wipe stuff away. And also, you know, guys, you have your palette knives. Using your palette knives to mix paint is definitely best practice, because if you do that, it'll elongate the lives of your brushes. Personally, I tend to be a bit of a lazy painter, and I'll just mix using my paintbrush. But if you mix with your paintbrush, the downside of that is that the paint will work its way up into the ferrule. This is the ferrule here. And once the paint's in there, it's really hard to clean it out. All right, so I'm just kind of blocking in some of these areas. You know, we've got a very basic light source from this side, darker shadow on that side, so let's work on that. And see, that's what I'm talking about here with the stem getting covered up. There's going to be so much reworking. It's not important to get it just right from the start. All right, let's get back to this darker side here. And just lay some of that shadowy area in. Okay, so we're starting to get the character of this apple. We're starting to see a lighter area, some mid-tone areas, and a shadowy area developing. At this point, I think I want to pay a little bit of attention to the bowl underneath it. And I grabbed a different brush because, you know, it's hard to move from a green apple to a white bowl, because the green is going to get into that white. You know, it's just going to make the white feel very green. So you either need to sit and clean out your brush properly, meaning dip it in the Gamsol, kind of try and get as much paint out of there as possible, or switch to another brush, which is what I'm doing. All right, I think with this, I'm going to determine some of the lighter areas. So I'm covering a lot of space here, so I chose to, in the end, I chose this kind of big filbert brush because it'll cover a lot of ground. We're not going to get too detailed with the bowl today. I just want there to be a sense of the character of it. And you guys see how quickly I'm developing this? You know, you guys will have more time in class. So if you want, you know, you can be more precise. But for this early stage, roughing it in is a safe bet. All right, okay, so we have the start of our still life here. It's very rough. I mean, this doesn't look realistic yet, but we're gonna get there. And this is where the wet into wet starts coming in, because now we have all of this wet paint down, and because oil paint is, you know, the oil in it doesn't dry very quickly, so your paint will be changeable for quite a while. If you use no mediums, if you're just using paint straight from the tube, it will be changeable for days. I like to use a bit of liquid to speed up the drying process, and with liquid, it's touch dry within a little over a day. It'll be dry. Well, oil paint won't be really dry for at least 6 months. Okay, let's go back to this apple. Alright, so we have a little Alla Prima apple right here. Okay, let's go ahead and start working with some of this surrounding area and also touching up that bowl. I think for the surrounding area, I'm going to keep it dark. Maybe I'll explore a darker application of that burnt sienna color with a little bit of additional black mixed in. All right, so we're getting this dark background in here. And one thing to think about when you're painting is that you don't need your edges to be absolutely perfect. And in some cases, it can actually be nicer to have a bit of an imperfect edge. Okay. All right, so this is just a really quick little demo Alla Prima painting. I did mine pretty fast. You guys will have longer sessions to work on yours, so you can really keep pushing at your paintings. You know, play with the darks, the lights, make sure you get those highlights in there. Just push the paint around and really consider warm versus cool in your work. Okay, thanks for painting with me today, guys, and I will see you all soon.